12 years before the Second Great Shinobi War. What's in a name? What did names even mean? Why did they matter? Those questions had meant little to him in his first life. He'd been named Victor, a simple strong name that any man could be proud of. It led to a lot of Victor Von Doom jokes, but he'd long acknowledged that those jokes were entirely a consequence of his own actions. After all, he'd been the one to make the choice to hang out with the 12 people in 1,000 who knew that the famous MCU villain had a name as common as Victor. In this world, however, in his second life, for lack of a better term, things could not be more different. His name was a million things in one. A statement to others, and a warning to him. Hashirama Senju. The triumph, his first name translated into. An innocuous enough name if one didn't consider the context. His mother, Hinori Hyuga, the twin sister to the Hyuga clan head, had chosen to bestow the name on him because he'd been born on precisely the day that the news returned to Konoha that the Great Shinobi War had come to an end. Even in his thoughts, he did not dare to refer to it as the First War. When he'd called it such, it was only his age that saved him from a spontaneous lynching in the crowd of grieving parents, spouses, and children. His name and his blood, as well. Whether he carried the stereotypical Senju looks or not, little could be done to deny the fact that he was the grandnephew of the second Hokage, Tobirama Senju. Pay attention, his minder hissed at him, and he nodded, looking down at the crowd of mourners. That was what had brought his thoughts to his age. Once again, the festival of remembrance had come about, and this time, like all others, he was forced to attend dressed in a mournful sober black and forced to maintain a sober contemplative expression. He chanced a glance to the side and noted his older cousin looking boldly bored out of her mind. A 15-year-old Tsunade Senju was a force of stubborn energy that could not be denied. She'd thrown a stinker at being summoned to stand at the same position she'd occupied in every procession. The same stinker she threw last year, and the year before that. Regardless, she stood. She made it clear she didn't want to be here, but that was the best that she could do. A cough drew his attention to the man that forced the stubborn slug summoner to his will. Tobirama Senju, second Hokage of the Leaf. Uncle. He moved the hat on his head before he tossed it to the side completely. He bared his pale skin to the audience and showed off his long white hair. Welcome. Once again, we stand together in mourning. In mourning for what has been taken from us. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, all gone at the hands of the enemy as they sought to do the impossible. They tried to extinguish the will of fire. Every year, we hold this procession to mourn, and every year I remind you all that they have failed. What they sought to extinguish burns hot and bright. 8 years ago my nephew, Itama Senju son of Hashirama, was killed in an ambush from cowardly shinobi of Iwagakure at the twilight of the Great War. Now, I present to you his son, Hashirama Senju. What did he mean? I felt my minder push me forward and my legs complied before my brain could stop them. I covered the few steps that separated me from my granduncle on the rooftop of the giant Hokage tower in what felt like slow motion. My eyes twitched as I looked for some sort of salvation from whatever this was to be. Searching for my mother was a waste of time. She didn't attend. Few things could rouse her from bed, and a memorial in her late husband's honor was not one of them. I met Tsunade's eyes as I walked past her, and for the first time today she was paying full attention. Sharp eyes followed me on every step I took. When I finally reached him, I felt strong hands grab onto my shoulder as I was turned around to look at the crowd. I gulped at the sight. It looked like all of Konoha was here. Thousands of citizens lined the walkways, surrounding the tower and stretching back far and wide. This was the village hidden in the leaves in her full glory. My nephew will continue his education at the Konoha Shinobi Academy in the hopes of living up to his father's legacy. The Hidden Stone thought they would rob us of one of our own with their cowardly attack, but here Itama's son stands, ready to take up his father's mantle in defense of the will of fire. I urge you all, follow Hashirama's example. Enroll your children and wards in the academy today. After that, I zoned out. My thoughts were flooded. The Shinobi Academy. I'd never been an idiot. I knew that as a descendant of both the Senju and Hyuga clans, I'd be expected to become a shinobi one way or another. But nothing had ever been said about the academy. From what I knew, the academy was for civilian children. Clan children received their tutelage at home. My tutelage had been handled by a rotating contingent of retainers from the Hyuga branch family. Everything from etiquette and calligraphy to taijutsu and shurin kenjutsu had been covered in those lessons. They told me of my genius loudly and often. I had no doubts that I was quite ahead of my age group. So why was I being shunted off to the academy? Well done, Shorirama-sama. Now a few more tries and it will be perfect, he said with a smile on his face. Hayate was a man who smiled easily and acted like a puppy in the body of a man. He was skilled, easily on the level of a Junin, but his easygoing nature and timid personality meant that he got to spend his days training brats like me instead of writing his name in the history books with the blood of Konoha's enemies. He got a good deal. Not a deal that I'd ever get, however. I had expectations. Alright, that's enough for today. I'll take over my grandson's training for today, I heard from above as grandmother Mito began descending the stairs. She did it slowly for the first few steps before turning to my cousin and barking, "Come help your grandmother, you fool girl." Tsunade wasted no time in catching up to her and helping her down the stairs. But Mito-sama, Tobarama-sama agreed with the elders too. Hayate was cut off almost as quickly as he began. "I don't care what my brother-in-law has agreed with your clan. This is my grandson," she said firmly. Any other member of the Hyuga clan would have stood their ground. Not Hayate. The man bowed and disappeared with a shunshin almost immediately. I had no doubts that he was going to report to whatever elders he answered to. "Now that it's just family here, what do you say we do something fun?" She asked me and my smile could have blinded the sun. There was one thing that lessons with Mito meant. Sure, she'd been a skilled enough shinobi in her time, but what made her truly special was her prowess with fuinjutsu. That was what she spent her time trying to pass down to me. "Come along with us, Tsunade," she said, dragging my cousin with us once she noticed her attempt to disappear in a shunshin of her own. "Fuinjutsu is so boring, ggg," Tsunade drawled as Mito began to physically drag her with us towards the practice room, her act of being a frail old woman long abandoned. "Yay fuinjutsu," I said, pumping one hand in the air. Pretending to be an 8-year-old could be fun, sometimes. Especially for annoying foolish cousins. What distinguishes a seal in fuinjutsu from a hand seal used in ninjutsu? She asked the both of us as we sat in seiza before her, scrolls out and brushes it out left-hand sides. That was an interesting trait we shared, Tsunade and I. Left-handedness. I racked my brain for an answer, while it looked to all the world that Tsunade had mentally checked out from the lesson. I knew that in canon, Tsunade would become competent with fuinjutsu, competent enough to have a seal on her literal forehead, but the fact that even then she'd be considered lesser to both her teammates said a lot. With a pedigree like hers, no one should have been able to come close. She just wasn't interested. A direct opposite to me, at the very least. I had a passion for fuinjutsu. Partly because of how easy it came to a brain that had aced university-level physics, and also partly because of how necessary it would be. Fuinjutsu was one hell of an equalizer, and it was one of the few things that could bridge the gap between Junin and the literal natural disasters in human skin known as S-rank ninja. It was my theory that only the Flying Thunder God could have made Minato a monster capable of running circles around 2 or even 3 S-rank shinobi at the same time. Sure, he never managed to actually kill them, but surviving to tell the tale was a feat on its own. Needless to say, I had a shit ton of motivation fueling my interest. Fuinjutsu seals are written, but hand seals are done with the hands, I finally said after racking my brain trying to come up with something at least more inspired. Tsunade's instant chuckle at my response was not the most encouraging thing, but I'd long since learned not to expect encouragement from this version of the Sanin. She was firmly in her troublesome teens and had somehow decided that being a sarcastic bitch to everyone who shared blood with her was the ideal way to assert her independence and maturity. Never mind that she still lived in the clan compound and spent clan money on whatever whims caught her fancy. Sure, she donated her entire pay to the clan, but that was besides the point. Something slightly more than the readily apparent, Shori-chan, Mito deadpanned, making me flush entirely against my will. That was a good one. Fuinjutsu seals are more varied. There's as many as 369 characters in the Uzumaki script alone, and it's just one of dozens, but there are only 12 hand signs. 12 standard ones, at least, Tsunade suddenly said, making me turn to her. The way she rolled her eyes at me once she noticed my attention made me want to curse out loud, but I just took the loss. It stung to lose to someone who wasn't even trying, but that was the way the world worked. Slightly better, and close to the actual answer. But wrong still, Mito said, making me want to jump up and celebrate. Tsunade's smug look was wiped off her face quicker than grime in the face of a pressure hose. An accurate answer lies in their purpose. Hand seals regulate the flow of chakra in the body. They act as a crutch for ninjutsu or genjutsu, telling your chakra to contort itself in a predetermined manner. That is why when you get skilled enough, you can shave a few seals off a jutsu